The date has been set, and the Capitals will face the New York Rangers in Game 1 of the playoffs Sunday afternoon. What to look for and what to expect next on this crossover edition of Locked On Capitals and Rangers.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holney. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it is being a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on a classic Monopoly. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go now on the App Store or on Google Play. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about our big storylines going into the playoffs. We know that the Rangers won the President's Trophy, but the Capitals had to wait to the last game of the regular season to back into the playoffs. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We will talk about what are some of the key matchups in the Rangers versus the Capitals. There's a long history with the Capitals in the playoffs, and it actually favors the Rangers. And then we will give our predictions on who we think will win it all.
All right, so Dan, here we are again. It's been a little while, but we were talking right before we hit record. There's obviously a lot of playoff history between these two franchises. They've gone back and forth. You mentioned that the last 3 times they've met each other, they've gone to 7 games. And, we'll get into the matchups and the storylines and all that good stuff and make some predictions. But first, man, I just wanted to ask you what it was like. Such a unique clinching scenario for the Capitals where, if they win, they're in, but they're playing the Flyers. Flyers have to beat them in regulation, and the Caps end up getting basically a playoff clinching empty net goal in a tie game. So what was that like for you and for Capitals fans watching that game? I'm sure on pins and needles, obviously hoping that they get in.
It was an interesting thing, and then we take a look at it, is that John Tortorella pulled a goalie and find out he didn't really need to do it. It was an interesting game. I knew that all the Capitals really had to do was find a way to win it in regulation. That was going to give them their best path at victory, but they overcome great odds. I was down to the last 3 games of the season, and they had to win the last 3 games, and they did the improbable. They won 3 huge games in a row, and they got the last wild card spot in the last game of the season, really down to the wire.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the bigger storylines here, Alex Ovechkin, 38 years old at this point, obviously still, a great player. And it's funny because you look at his numbers and you think like, oh, well, that's down a little bit for him, but he's 38 and 90% of the players in this league would take those numbers in a heartbeat. So still a great player. Just your take on what you've seen from him so far this season. And can he still be that guy, that we've seen in the past capable of, taking over a playoff series?
He absolutely can. If you take a look at what he did, his slowest start in his career in the goal scoring department, a lot of insiders said that he was washed, that his best days were behind him. And then the Capitals went to the All-Star break. He went to Dubai with his family and was riding around on some camels, hit the reset button, came back to this team, went into the All-Star break with like 8 goals, and then went on a tear, ended the season with 31 goals, doing the improbable of just scoring when the Capitals ultimately needed it. So I think that is a lesson. And, you heard John Carlson and Tom Wilson, is to never doubt the big man. He'll always prove you wrong. That despite the fact that he got off to his slowest start, he continues to be that key contributor on this team and ultimately was the guy that grabbed the bull by the horns and pulled this Capitals team across the finish line into victory lane.
Yeah, bottom line, never count out a legend. Hearing you kind of describe that, it's a little different, but obviously the Rangers picked up Jonathan Quick this offseason, and same thing. All the experts and all the fans, oh, he's washed, he's lousy, he's this, he's that. And had a heck of a season, as the Ranger backup goalie and adapted to life pretty well there. Another really interesting storyline for me regarding the Capitals too is that, they going into the trade deadline kind of on the bubble as far as, playoffs, not playoffs, and some tough decisions to make. And they actually sold at the deadline, Anthony Mantha, Joel Edmondson, Evgeny Kuznetsov. So I'm just wondering, man, like in a hypothetical situation here, like if you could push a button right now and undo all those trades, have those guys back on this team for this playoff run, would you do that? Or are you happy with the returns that they got for those players? And, you'll take your chances with the team that they have right now.
Listen, everything works out for the best. If to answer your question, I would go with it as is. I don't have any takebacks. Kuznetsov was inconsistent with this team pretty much, through the entire duration of his career. Anthony Mantha had a breakout season in a contract year. Surprise, surprise. But you take a look at his production the year before. Not so good. And then you take a look at Joel Edmondson that was moved out. He was that gritty defenseman that the Capitals like. But, what this team is kind of a patch quilt group of players. It's players that got called up based out of necessity from Hershey. Some of these young players on the Capitals and the veterans really had to bind together to make the team what they are right now. So to answer your question, I have no takebacks. I ultimately like what Brian McClellan did. It's interesting that the perception was that the Capitals were out of it. They were going to be sellers. And then they did the improbable, is to take this team to the playoffs and do it with Spencer Carbery. They missed it last season. They hadn't missed it since 2014. So an about face for the Capitals, and I am all in on this lineup. I think the Capitals have that extra gear in the playoffs, and we're going to see the big guys step up like Alex Ovechkin, Tom Wilson, John Carlson, the Minute Monster, and most notably Charlie Lindgren, who has been the saving grace for the Capitals this season. I'm all hyped on this current lineup.
Yeah, I definitely want to wait a little bit later in today's episode, but I'm definitely going to ask you about Charlie Lindgren, obviously the brother of Ranger defenseman Ryan Lindgren. And, obviously, some players have stepped up for you guys. And you mentioned, the best players need to be the best players. And I think when you look at the Rangers, it's kind of the same deal right now. Artemi Panarin with just a phenomenal season. I think he should be in the Hart conversation at the very least. I don't know that he'll win it. There are some players with some more points. I always argue that it's not always the best player, it's the most valuable player. But we do see that award go to the player with the most points. But, Panarin, I think a lot of people are going to be watching him, not just Rangers and Capitals fans, but fans around the NHL because, phenomenal season, 120 points. Rough showing in the playoffs last year with the Devils. Did all right the year before that run to the Eastern Conference final that the Rangers had there. But, obviously he's going to be under the microscope, I think, as much as just about any player in this league when it comes to performing in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I mean, just taking a look at the Capitals, it's not going to be easy for them either. We take a look at how those two teams have played together historically, and there is a lot of weaponry on the Rangers that the Capitals will have to look out for. Again, the Rangers winning the President's Trophy, it's not going to be an easy out, that is for sure. But ultimately, you take a look at historically, it favors the Rangers. They have won, or they have beat the Capitals more times in the playoffs, but the last 3 times, like you mentioned to start off the show, it went to Game 7. So when it goes to Game 7, ultimately, I think anything is possible.
Yeah, it's crazy. The players change, the coaches change, fans maybe even change. Each fan base gets new fans, but it always stays the same. This is always a battle, and it tends to get a little bit nasty between these two teams, and I'm sure we'll see at least some of that in the playoffs. I want to keep everything rolling in just a second. Dan and I are going to talk a little bit about some key players to watch in this series from both sides. First, though, we definitely would like to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers and Locked On Capitals is brought to you by Monopoly Go. We've been told, Dan and I, that we have competitive sides, but we all do. And our competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is messing with your friends. You can charge them rent on iconic properties, just like classic Monopoly, and you can also heist their vaults of riches for yourself. And the leaderboards show you who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not just our competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world, and time tournaments turn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now free on the App Store or Google Play. And also just want to mention that, of course, we have to ask if you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day, have to turn on the volume with all that shouting, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And so, Dan, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about, some key players to watch on both sides of this matchup here, this great rivalry that's about to be renewed in a big way here. I'll let you go first, man. Who's a player that, we all need to be watching when the puck drops on Sunday?
Well, who's been an absolute game changer for the Capitals this season has been Charlie Lindgren. He is the guy that, we went into this season. He was the number 2 netminder for the Capitals. It was Darcy Kemper's net, of course, because he had the pedigree. He had the Stanley Cup winning background to him. But you take a look at Darcy Kemper, he has posted some of his worst stats this season. So Charlie Lindgren, a guy that was a relatively unknown netminder before he made his way to the Capitals, has been absolutely clutch for the Capitals. His record on the season, 25-16-7, and 6 shutouts on the season. And, just some interesting stats, and sometimes it's fun to look into the stats on certain players, is what Charlie Lindgren has meant to this team. If you take a look at advanced analytics, Lindgren alone stole 7 games for the Capitals. That's good for 14 points. So definitely a game changer for this team. And I'm going to go ahead and make a bold statement, not really a bold statement as a Capitals fan, but I don't think the Capitals would be in the playoffs this year if it wasn't for Charlie Lindgren. Let's take a look at the Rangers. Who have been the game changers for the Rangers? I mean, obviously, you take a look at where they are in the standings. There's a lot to like. Who has really stood out on the Rangers?
Well, it's a very standard answer, but it's also a correct answer, and I'm going to stick with your theme of going with the goalie, and that's, of course, Igor Shesterkin. 2 years ago, he had that Vezina winning season. He was the hands-down winner at that. I mean, there was no debate to be had that year, and he even was one of the 3 finalists for the Hart. And, the last 2 years, he's still been a very good goalie. I would say even an elite goalie, top 5 area in the league. But there have been times over these last 2 seasons where he's gone through a bit of a rough patch here and there. And in this year, it seemed to happen maybe like toward the end of December and then certainly into January. Now, granted, the entire Ranger team struggled in January. That was far and away the worst month that they had this season. But Igor's back in a big way. These last 2 games in particular that he's played, he's been absolutely outstanding. And somebody that, the numbers are nice and everything, but it really feels like he's Johnny on the spot when it comes to big saves in big spots. He's not just a goalie that puts up the pretty numbers. He's a guy that comes through in clutch moments. If there's a situation in the third period, like a good way to look at this, the Rangers led the NHL in come from behind wins this season. And a big part of that is your goalie keeping you in the game. And he's in there for most of those games. And a lot of instances where maybe the Rangers are trailing by a goal and he'll just make a ridiculous glove save and keep it at 1 and allow them the chance to come back. So he's been big time. And, I mentioned the clutch scene. When the Rangers have been facing elimination in the playoffs over the last 2 years, he is 6-2 in those games. So I don't know how many games this series is going to go, and we'll make those predictions later. But if the Rangers do get into a spot where their back is against the wall or, they're up against it, in this series or whatever it might be, he's certainly a guy you want in net and a guy that you have a lot of confidence in. It just seems like he steps up his game when it counts the most. And so with that, Dan, we covered the goalies. I'd imagine you're going to a skater next. Who you got for another key player there for the Caps?
Yeah, so another player that has been money for the Capitals, of course, we talked about him in the top segment, is Alex Ovechkin, who is number 2 all-time in goals scored, just right behind the great one, Wayne Gretzky. He has been that clutch piece for the Capitals this season. Alex Ovechkin, who started the season slow, 9 goals going into the All-Star break, found that fountain of youth. He finished the season with 31 goals. And after he started and he got to that slow start, he was only projected at 15. Yes, Alex Ovechkin was projected to only hit 15 goals. He did the unthinkable and hit that 30-goal mark, and he's done that in 18 seasons. Quite stunning. So what is the secret sauce? What is behind his success? Moving his feet. That was one of the things that was kind of the bugaboo of him to start off the season, is he would just kind of plant himself at the office from the left dot and just power it home, and just not setting up from his office. He had equipment issues. And not to mention that the Capitals power play, his bread and butter, where he scores a lot of goals, wasn't off to a great start. But after the All-Star break, the power play was engaged as well. And oftentimes on the show, I say, as Alex Ovechkin goes, so goes the Capitals. The power play also took off and was one of the league's best. So ultimately, I think Alex Ovechkin has been one of the key pieces as far as a forward is concerned. Let's take a look at the Rangers. Who has been that secret forward that has really helped catapult the Rangers up over the top?
I'm going to go like as far as like a key player to watch here, somebody that could make a difference in this series. A little bit of a dark horse. I'm actually going to go with Kaapo Kakko. There's times over his career where I feel like he's really been snake bitten. And of course, he got injured early this season, seemed to, he wasn't really scoring a whole lot even before then, but kind of got a clean slate when he got back into the lineup. And one thing I've said about him is, if you take away the draft status, and everybody knows he went number 2 overall, and when somebody goes, top 3, top 5 overall, you're expecting, assuming it's a forward, you're expecting, big time points and big time offensive production, and that hasn't been there. But if you take away his draft status, you just look at him as a 23-year-old NHL forward. I mean, this guy's off to like a solid start. He's a exceptional defensive forward, so that's always, very nice to see that even when he's not scoring, he can help in that way. And something that's very interesting about Kakko is that, when he's on the top line, or when he's in a top 6 role and he's out there on a line with like Zibanejad or Kreider, or like maybe in some cases Panarin, not so much this season, but other seasons with Panarin every once in a while, it seems like he kind of fades into the background. And then when he's out there with like journeymen or like rookie players, like, Cooley, Brodzinski, they trade for Wenberg. He's been on his line for a while. That's when he seems to really assert himself and pick things up offensively a little bit. And as far as like, the Capitals' depth, I mean, I know they traded some players. I know they've still got some very good players there as well. But you know how important it is in the Stanley Cup playoffs to be able to roll 4 lines and to be able to have guys out there that you feel good about, and not have any lines where it's like, oh boy, we don't feel good about these guys, right? So I think Kaapo Kakko has a chance to be a difference maker. I don't know that he's going to lay up the score sheet every single game, but again, a strong defensive forward, and somebody that I still do think has that untapped potential offensively, and picked up the scoring a little bit down the stretch. So I'm interested to see what he can do in the playoffs this season. But with that, Dan, I'll throw it back to you, man. Another big-time key player to watch for the Capitals.
John Carlson, a minute monster for the Capitals. And, one of the guys that makes it look easy, oftentimes will skate 20 plus minutes a night, oftentimes near 30 minutes a night. And it's interesting that Martin Faravari was another Capitals player that says, I don't know how he does it. He tried to do it. It's difficult to emulate. He plays a lot of quality minutes on the blue line, between 20 and 30 minutes, holds the record for most goals scored by a Capitals defenseman. Just that steady Eddie on the blue line, a shutdown defenseman with an offensive flair, 10 goals on the season, 42 assists, has been absolute clutch for the Capitals. Oftentimes on the show, they'll ask me, who's my untouchables? I'll say John Carlson. I'll say it's Alex Ovechkin and Tom Wilson, but John Carlson is huge. He is the guy that Mitch Love, the coach for the Capitals that runs the defense, says that he refers to John Carlson as almost like another coach, that he is a guy, he's a war horse that's been there, that's done that. And ultimately, what has kept the Capitals in games defensively, and also his offensive prowess as well, is oftentimes what has led to the Capitals' victory. If we take a look at the Rangers, let's talk about any young players on this team. What are some of the young players on this team that have really popped off the page? There are veterans on the team, of course, but what are some of the names that maybe as a Capitals fan, we should get used to knowing that maybe we don't know?
Yeah, I mean, if you want somebody that's really under the radar, I would say certainly Will Cooley. He came into training camp in the preseason as I wouldn't say like a complete long shot to make the roster, but I would have put it at less than 50-50. And I think I did that when, we were doing our preseason episodes back in 2023 there. But, just a hard hitting forward. He's at or near the top of the league and hits by a rookie. Does have a good shot and somebody that I think is kind of stabilized the Ranger depth at forward. If you want somebody that, a little bit more name recognition, I would say certainly Alexis Lafreniere. Obviously, he's had flashes in previous seasons, and there's times where it looks like he's going to take off, and it hasn't really happened. But this year, they put him with Artemi Panarin on the Panarin line, along with Vincent Trocheck as well. And Lafreniere had to move from the left side to the right side, and nobody even thinks about that anymore. Because at first, it's like, well, number 1 overall pick. Like, do we really want to make him change positions? But it's been awesome. He hit the ground running this season and just never looked back. Flirted with 30-30 season in terms of goals and assists. And, playing with Panarin has been great for him, but his skating has been so much better this season. And you're getting more of those wow moments that you expect from, number 1 overall picks. That was, I think the one maybe sort of red flag on Lafreniere before this season. The goals he would score were more of like the gritty variety, which is great. It's awesome that he can do that too. But yeah, I mean, you didn't see him being the goalie clean all that often with like these nasty shots. And this year he's doing it a lot. And I mean, that line has been absolutely lethal together and very dangerous on the rush. And, Lafreniere didn't do much of anything in the playoffs against the Devils last year. I don't think he even had a point in the 7 games. So he's going to be big. They're going to need more from Lafreniere this year. And just looks like a whole new player this year, more confident player. And I think they're going to get a good showing from Lafreniere for sure.
Yeah, you do need that, don't you? Sprinkled in there between youth and experience, and it looks like the Rangers have both of that. All right, so coming up here straight ahead, we will talk about notable stats, X factors, and predictions. But first, we'll talk about our friends over at Policy Genius. Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with a financial safety net. Starting today with Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million of coverage. Some options offer same-day approval and avoid unnecessary medical exams. And I'm one of the kind of guys that got life insurance because I have kids. I got a wife at home, and I wanted them to be prepared in the unfortunate event that something happened to me. Policy Genius helps you compare your options from top companies, and their teams of licensed expert is on hand to help you walk your way through it. Talk to a team of award-winning agents who will walk you through this process step by step. Check life insurance off your to-do list in no time with Policy Genius. Head to policygenius.com/lockedonnhl or click the link in the description to get your free life insurance quotes and see how much money you could save. That's policygenius.com/lockedonnhl. All right, welcome back into this bonus crossover edition of Locked On Rangers and Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So let's talk about some stats. Before the show, we were talking about how the Rangers, historically, when the Capitals and Rangers have played together, the Rangers have won more times than the Capitals have. Take a look at the stats. Where do you see this series going? Do you see the Rangers getting out to a quick start, or do you think the Capitals could sneak in a game or two to start it off?
Yeah, I think that the way this plays out, I mean, I don't want to. Should we just do our predictions now, or do you want to save that for the end? Because I don't think I can answer this without probably giving away my prediction for the series.
You absolutely can right now. I mean, I think let's talk about it.
Why not? Why not? So I would say I think the Rangers. I was making it wasn't even really a joke. I was talking on my show the other day that I'm at the point with the Rangers that I don't think I would pick them to win a playoff series in less than 6 games under just about any circumstances. To begin with, I mean, the NHL is so competitive, and yeah, there's a discrepancy in how many, points both these teams got in the regular season and everything. But, you get to the playoffs and it really is a whole new season. Everybody starts at 0. And obviously, seeds, I mean, does it even really matter that much? I mean, I know the better seed gets home ice advantage and everything, but yeah, man, I've seen too many battles to think that this is going to be a quick and easy series for either team. I think it goes 6 games, and I think the Rangers find a way to get it done. As far as like how it plays out, I feel like the Rangers are going to do well at home. I could see them, very easily winning the first 2 games of this series. I think maybe the Capitals get one back, because they'll have their backs against the wall and they'll be at home and they'll get a boost from that. maybe the Rangers win like a dogfight in game 4. Game 5, us Ranger fans will all be ready to celebrate, and it won't happen because that's just the way it goes with the Rangers. And I think the Capitals veteran team, they'll have their pride and they'll battle back and find a way to win. And then maybe you get like a close, competitive game 6, and the Rangers finally seal the deal there. But what about you, Dan? I mean, how many games and how do you think it unfolds and all that good stuff?
Well, I do think that it will require 7 games, and historically that has been proven to be the case. We take a look at 2015, 2013, and 2012. It required 7 games, and not great news for the Capitals fans as the Rangers won the last 3 times. But a lot has changed since the last time the Capitals and the Rangers played each other. I think back fond memories between the Capitals and the Rangers playing in the playoffs. It was quite a bit different. Just taking a look at players that used to be on your team that were quite impactful. Henrik Lundqvist, I just remember that, a sure look on his face when he would make those really great saves, and it just drove Capitals fans absolutely nuts. So that is my prediction, that it will require 7 games. I ultimately think that this team, this underdog team of the Capitals, the team that snuck it in the last moment, backed their way into victory, into the playoffs, I think they're going to find a way to find that extra gear, and they're going to find a way to make it right and finally win in this first round of the playoffs against the Rangers. Let's talk here briefly about X factors. We were talking a little bit before we started recording here about a physical presence, and we know that Tom Wilson is actually probably not on the top of the list for Rangers fans for various reasons, but things have changed for the Rangers as well, as they have some more physicality. Do you think the physical game will factor in with the series between the Capitals and the Rangers?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, these are teams, certainly, we were talking right before we hit record here. There's never any love lost between these two teams. It does tend to get physical. It does tend to get nasty, and something that's a little bit of a subplot. And it's one of those things that, I think Ranger fans get excited about this, although I don't think it should take up, too much of the spotlight. Just this idea of like Rempe and Tom Wilson perhaps crossing paths. I said, and I mentioned this to you, Dan, right before we hit record, when I found out, of course, that the Capitals have won that game and they're in the playoffs and we're playing the Caps, it was like, okay, well, that increases Rempe's chances of playing by a lot because these games do get nasty. And of course, Tom Wilson's out there. And do we see them drop the gloves? I mean, I'm cool with it if it happens. I'm a hockey fan, and sign me up for something like that. And as you mentioned, Ranger fans, Tom Wilson not very high on any of our lists. So something like that could happen. Regardless, though, even if you take away, the Tom Wilson factor and the fact that Rangers don't really like him very much, again, it doesn't take much to really like the fuse when these two teams are playing each other. So I think for those reasons, we'll see Matt Rempe out there. And I think this for sure is going to be a very physical series. Do you see maybe like the Caps, because like scoring wise, I feel like the Rangers have the edge, but the Caps, would they try to like drag this down and make this just kind of like a gritty, like just grind it out, like nasty kind of a series? Like, could that almost be the game plan for them going into this thing?
Yeah, it's one of the things I've spoke of for a long time is the Capitals play the best when they are physically engaged. You take a look at the game where Nick Jensen got injured in the game, was just hit into the boards, and the team rallied around him, and it was kind of a sea change, I would say, for the Capitals, as you saw Nick Dowd, who is not historically a fighter. He wanted to take on Easymount and just threw him down to the ground. So I think to a certain extent, the identity of the Capitals is a physical team. They have the physical players, Tom Wilson, Alex Ovechkin, Beck Malenstein. They got the big guys on the team. Dylan McElrath had a cup of coffee on the Capitals towards the end of the season. That I think that if they can get the Rangers into a physical game, that is where they can excel. We were talking about Wilson and Rempe. I do think that could be one of the things that will motivate the team, and at least a game or two. Say that, you take a look at the Rangers having an advantage, or the Capitals. If they can add that physical element to the game, I think that oftentimes, for the Capitals anyway, that definitely motivates them. I got to imagine that would motivate the Rangers as well. If for some reason, the Rangers got into a fight and they were able to take down someone like a Tom Wilson, that could be a motivation for the Rangers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And something else, we've kind of touched on this a little bit throughout the episode, talking about players to watch and whatnot. But is there sort of like an unsung hero that you have in the Capitals? Like, because, Ranger fans, I mean, we've been going up against Ovechkin and Carlson for years, and obviously Wilson too. But is there somebody that like maybe isn't really a household name yet, but has impressed you with how he played down the stretch, and maybe even somebody that you think helped this team get into the playoffs?
Without question, Dylan Strome has been an absolute game changer for the Capitals this season. When Ovi and the Capitals were getting off to their slowest start, he led the team in goals for a lion's share of the season. Dylan Strome is very amped about playing in the playoffs. This is his first time playing in the playoffs. He didn't include the bubble year. And it's interesting that the Chicago Blackhawks did not give him a qualifying offer. Their loss is the Capitals' gain, as he has been absolutely clutch for the Capitals all season, scoring timely goals, ends the season 27 goals, second on the team in goals. Just only under the great eight, Alex Ovechkin. So I do think that Dylan Strome is a player that probably some average NHL fans know, maybe not everyone knows, but he is a dynamic player that could be a game changer for the Capitals. When they absolutely need to score a goal, oftentimes Dylan Strome is just the guy to get it done.
Interesting. I mean, I'm familiar with him, obviously, and his brother Ryan played for the Rangers for a few years, and he's kind of a polarizing Ranger because I don't think that like he wasn't really that guy that would do the dirty work, but he had just ridiculous chemistry with Panarin, and I think evolved into a leader while he was here. And certainly, I'm familiar with Dylan Strome as well. A little bit with the Blackhawks, but then of course seeing him up close and personal with the Capitals this season for sure. As far as like an under the radar Ranger, I'll throw out Braden Schneider, a defenseman. He's only 22 years old, debuted in the NHL about midway through the season 2 years ago, former first-round pick the same year that they got Lafreniere, number 1 overall, and somebody that, has had his hiccups from time to time, but somebody that overall I just think is a steady contributing member of the Ranger blue line, and he's actually gotten a little bit of a boost in the lineup because for years, really, I mean, basically ever since K'Andre Miller debuted, it was Miller and Trouba pretty much every night, and that pairing just hasn't really been clicking. So when Trouba was hurt, they went with Miller and Schneider. Trouba comes back, they go back to Miller and Trouba. But now that that didn't really work out so well, it's back to Miller and Schneider. So Schneider's in a top 4 role right now, and somebody that I think it's good that he's gotten some playoff experience over these last couple of years. Still very young, but one of those guys. Again, I just think he's a very steady, very consistent member of this Ranger team. Not like super flashy, he'll lay in a big hit every now and then, but just somebody again who's very steady, and I think going to be important in this series for sure.
Yeah, it is going to be an interesting series to be sure. And, listening to a lot of other local podcasts and stuff talking about it is that there is a lot of bad blood between the Rangers just based on the history. And I guess the bad blood or the bad feelings is a little bit more on the Capitals side, as the Rangers have got the better of the Capitals on a lot of occasions. And, oftentimes if you look at a knee-jerk reaction or just an easy thing to say on paper, it looks like the Rangers winning this series is a no-brainer. I mean, President's Trophy winning, you got Peter Laviolette, which is something we didn't touch on, our former coach on the Capitals, found a way to get it done for the Rangers when he wasn't able to get it done on the Capitals last season. That will be another interesting thing to look for, as Peter Laviolette, former Capitals coach, and Spencer Carbery, a guy, an unsung hero on this team, to be sure. Is a guy that got this team across the finish line. He was emotional when asked about actually getting this team to the playoffs, but a guy that I think will be a finalist for the Jack Adams Award, that the coaches, I think, could play a pivotal role in the success as well, because Spencer Carbery did some unconventional things by pulling Darcy Kemper out and putting in Charlie Lindgren and just shuffling up the lineup, that he was able to get this team to do the unthinkable, to make it to the playoffs. Talk to me here briefly about how you think Peter Laviolette factors into this.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's been great. And obviously, look, it didn't work out with him in the Capitals. I remember we actually did an offseason episode, Dan, because they had just hired Laviolette, and I'm talking to, all the Locked On hosts where Laviolette had coached that team in the past, and we talked about him for a while. And it just didn't work. And I think part of the reason for that was that the Capitals had a good amount of injuries, especially last season. I remember the Rangers playing them late last season. And it's like, who are these guys? Like, where are all the players that I'm used to the Rangers going up against? So, no, but he's come over and he's been great. And one of the things that kind of sold me on Laviolette was that And I didn't realize this until the Rangers hired him. It wasn't until I went back and looked up the rosters of the teams that had gone to the Stanley Cup final under Laviolette. And there were a lot of players on those rosters that were very young at the time. And he kind of got them to that next level, maybe even ahead of schedule in some cases. And that kind of sold me like, okay, he's going to do a good job with our young players, because obviously Rangers have a lot of young guys, Lafreniere and Kakko and Hedl before his injury. You're trying to get those guys to that next level. And again, that was very encouraging for me. And I think he's done a nice job. If I'm going to just, oversimplify it, he's tough, but he's fair. He is tough on his players. He's a demanding coach, but I don't think he does anything like really over the top or really ridiculous that, you might get out of certain coaches like John Tortorella, just randomly scratching players and whatnot. So yeah, Laviolette's been great. It took a while to get used to him being our coach now, because I'm so used to him coaching the Caps or the Flyers or the Islanders. So, but it's been great so far, so good. And yeah, can't wait to see what happens. And Carbery's obviously done a nice job for you guys as well. And I know that he was at least something of a candidate for the Rangers. So it will absolutely be interesting to see what happens when these teams are matched up against each other.
All right. I want to thank you for joining us on this special crossover edition of Locked On Rangers and Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On's 24/7 streaming channel, available on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app and on YouTube. And let's just hope for a great series for the Capitals and the Rangers. And I'll talk to you guys again next time.